And I won female vocalist in '96.
Wow. Yeah.
And he wasn't able again to be at the show. We all were going through a lot of emotions, so...
For decades, country music fans have witnessed one of the most beautiful musical partnerships in the history of the genre. Patti Loveless and Vince Gill have graced stages together, recorded unforgettable duets, and maintained a friendship that has stood the test of time. Now, at 69 years old, Patti Loveless is opening up about her relationship with Vince Gill in ways she never has before. What Patti is revealing now goes beyond the surface-level appreciation we've seen in interviews over the years. Her words paint a picture of a friendship forged in the fires of artistic passion and sustained by unwavering loyalty and respect. The early days. Patti Loveless, born Patricia Lee Ramey in Pikeville, Kentucky, and Vince Gill, raised in Oklahoma but deeply tied to bluegrass traditions, carried something that felt older than fame and bigger than charts. A meeting in Nashville during the 1980s did not spark romance. A different kind of recognition showed up, quiet but strong. A shared respect for real country music, a shared understanding of where that sound came from. How often does that kind of connection happen in an industry driven by trends? Conversation from Patti often circles back to first impressions. A voice heard across a room, clean and powerful, but carrying weight. Not just technique, not just range, feeling, experience, a kind of honesty that cannot be faked. Patti once explained that moment as hearing someone who understood heartbreak and joy without needing to explain anything. How does a voice carry that much truth without saying a single extra word? That question alone says a lot about what stood out. Nashville during that period felt like a crossroads. Country music leaned in two directions at once. Traditional sounds pushed back into the spotlight while polished. Pop-influenced production started gaining ground. Artists faced pressure to adapt, stay relevant, or stay rooted. Both paths came with risks. Patti and Vince moved through that space carefully, almost like balancing on a line. Stay real, but do not disappear. Grow, but do not lose identity. Sounds simple, but was anything about that moment simple? Vince had already built a reputation long before mainstream success hit. Session work filled studios across Nashville. Guitar skills earned quiet respect from musicians who understood what great playing sounded like. A voice like that did not need heavy production tricks. Pure tone, strong delivery, and emotional clarity carried enough weight. Patti, on another side of that journey, worked through earlier career struggles and slowly stepped into a clearer artistic identity. A voice shaped by Appalachian roots began to find full expression. Timing started to align. But timing alone never guarantees anything, right? First professional connections came through studio circles. Nashville operates like a network where names travel fast. Producers talk, musicians recommend each other. A name like Vince Gill often came up in conversations about adding depth to a track. Not flash, not noise, depth. Something that lifts a song without overpowering it. Patti noticed something different during those early collaborations. No ego, no rush to dominate a record. Just attention to the music itself. How often does that happen when reputations start growing? Patti described that approach in simple terms. Vince listened first, understood the message behind a song, then added what served that message. Not what showed off skill, not what drew attention, just what made the song better. That mindset stood out in a space where many artists chased recognition. What happens when someone focuses on the music instead of personal spotlight? Results usually speak louder than intention. Respect built slowly but firmly. No forced partnership. No calculated branding move. Just repeated moments of musical alignment. A shared belief that country music carried responsibility. Stories mattered. Delivery mattered. Authenticity mattered. That kind of foundation does not need marketing language. It builds itself over time. And when collaboration finally happens naturally, a certain ease shows up. No strain, no trying too hard, just flow. Kentucky roots added another layer to that connection. Bluegrass traditions shaped both artists in different ways, but led to similar instincts. Mountain music carries a specific feeling. High, lonesome tones. Simple arrangements that leave room for emotion. Lyrics built around lived experience, not abstract ideas, not polished fantasy, real life. That shared background created a musical language both understood without explanation. How does someone explain a sound that feels like home? When voices blended, something clicked almost instantly. Harmony felt natural, not rehearsed. A kind of musical conversation happened without effort. Studio recordings captured that chemistry, but informal sessions often revealed even more. No pressure, no audience expectations, just music. That environment often shows truth more clearly than any polished release. And truth, in this case, sounded unmistakable. Industry shifts continued through that era. Trends changed. Production styles evolved. New artists entered the scene with different influences. Still, certain qualities remained constant for Patty Loveless and Vince Gill. Commitment to craft, respect for tradition, a belief that songs should mean something. Not every artist holds on to those values when pressure builds. So why did that commitment remain steady here? Maybe background played a role. Early exposure to bluegrass and country traditions often shapes long-term perspective. Music becomes more than a career. Music becomes identity. When identity is tied to sound, compromise feels heavier. That might explain why both artists navigated change without losing core essence. Growth happened, but roots stayed visible. Over time, that partnership stood as more than occasional collaboration. A quiet example formed. Authentic music still finds space even during periods of heavy industry influence. Skill still matters. Emotion still matters. And connection, real connection, still stands out in a crowded field. Looking back, early Nashville meetings between Patty Loveless and Vince Gill feel less like coincidence and more like alignment. Two artists moving through the same environment, carrying similar values, finding common ground without forcing anything. Does that kind of musical connection happen often? Not really. And maybe that rarity explains why the impact still feels strong years later. The magic of their musical chemistry. When Patty Loveless speaks about making music with Vince Gill, a noticeable warmth enters every quote. A mix of respect and quiet excitement comes through in every line. A statement often shared goes like this: "Singing with Vince feels like coming home." And voices blend in a way that sounds easy, even though real effort sits behind that ease. That kind of honesty says a lot. How often does music sound effortless while carrying so much work underneath? Early collaboration on When I Call Your Name introduced that connection to a wider audience. Lead credit belonged to Vince, yet harmony from Patty added something deeper, something that pushed a strong song into unforgettable territory. Recognition followed quickly, including a major award from the Country Music Association in 1990. A question naturally comes up here. What exactly changed in that moment? A simple answer appears in the blend. Two voices meeting at just the right emotional point can shift everything. Later duets such as My Kind of Woman / My Kind of Man showed even more depth. Listeners often describe these songs as honest, rather than just polished. Technical skill played a role, of course, but emotion carried more weight. Lyrics about love, respect, and partnership felt believable because real friendship and admiration existed behind every note. Without that foundation, would any performance land the same way? Probably not. Questions about romance have followed this partnership for years. Patty usually answers in a thoughtful way, explaining that a deeper connection exists, something closer to a soul-level understanding. A phrase often used describes a musical soulmate bond. That kind of connection relies on trust and openness. Singing together requires vulnerability, and vulnerability demands safety. Without trust, how can voices open up fully? Without openness, how can emotion reach listeners? Live performances make this bond even clearer. Stage moments between these two artists often look almost effortless, yet careful attention reveals something more. Timing matches perfectly. Small musical decisions happen in sync. One voice rises, another supports. One phrase stretches, another follows. A kind of musical conversation unfolds without words. Many performances feel impossible to recreate exactly. Why does that happen? Because real connection cannot be copied or rehearsed into existence. Guitar work from Vince adds another layer to every collaboration. Patty often speaks about that musicianship with admiration, describing a style focused on serving a song rather than showing off. Every note carries intention. Every phrase supports meaning. That approach changes how a song feels. Flashy playing might impress, but purposeful playing connects. Which one lasts longer in memory? Purpose almost always wins. From a technical angle, both voices bring impressive range and control. Patty offers a tone that feels strong yet slightly rough around the edges, creating emotional texture. Vince brings a clear, soaring sound capable of both power and softness. When combined, harmony becomes rich but still easy to listen to. Complexity does not push listeners away. Instead, complexity invites listeners in. How does that balance happen so naturally? Practice plays a part, but understanding plays a bigger role. Beyond technique, something less visible drives every collaboration. A shared emotional language exists. Songs about love, loss, faith, or joy receive the same careful attention. Each lyric gets treated with respect. Each note carries intention. Without that shared understanding, would songs feel as unified? Likely not. Music needs more than skill. Music needs meaning. Patty often reflects on lessons learned from Vince, especially the idea that technical perfection alone does not guarantee impact. A perfectly sung note without feeling can fall flat. Emotion remains the true goal. Pitch, phrasing, and control act as tools, not final outcomes. That perspective shifts how music gets created. Instead of chasing flawlessness, focus moves toward connection. And connection always leaves a stronger mark. Looking at this partnership as a whole, one idea stands out clearly. Real chemistry cannot be forced. Real chemistry grows from respect, trust, and shared purpose. When all three finally come together, something shifts in a way that is hard to ignore. Music stops feeling like a performance and begins to feel like a real conversation. And that is where the deeper story begins. Stay till the very end. Standing by each other through industry challenges. Country music has always had a tough side, especially for artists who refuse to chase trends just to stay on radio. Patty Loveless once explained that pressure came often, sometimes quietly, sometimes directly. Record labels looked at numbers and started asking questions. Why not lean more into pop sounds? Why not change producers or try different songs? Sales charts became the argument. But Patty shared that Vince Gill kept bringing focus back to something deeper. Vince kept saying Patty already had something rare, a pure country voice that did not need reshaping. What was the point of success if identity disappeared along the way? Support did not move in just one direction. Vince also faced criticism, especially during a time when traditional country started losing space to more rock-influenced sounds. Some people called Vince too traditional. Album numbers did not always match bigger commercial acts. Patty made sure that kind of talk did not stick. Patty reminded Vince that respect from musicians carried real weight. Charts changed every week, but musical standards lasted much longer. Isn't that what really defines a legacy? That period around the late 1990s into the early 2000s created a strange feeling across country music. A shift was happening. Radio leaned toward louder production and crossover appeal. Traditional artists started getting less airplay, even when critics still praised the work. Patty once mentioned conversations that came up during that time. Questions started creeping in. Had the sound become outdated? Was the audience moving on? Doubt can creep in fast in moments like that. But then live shows told a different story. Crowds still showed up. Faces in those audiences reflected something honest. People still hungry for real lyrics and real instruments. Doesn't that say more than any chart position? Another chapter brought a different kind of challenge. Health issues started affecting Patty's voice in the mid-2000s. For a singer, that kind of uncertainty can feel overwhelming. A voice is not just a tool. A voice carries identity, career, and connection to fans. Patty recalled that Vince stayed present during that time, not with empty reassurances, but with steady support. Conversations focused on listening rather than fixing. Sometimes that matters more. When everything feels uncertain, isn't simple understanding the one thing that actually helps? Patty also shared that Vince reminded her of something important during that period. A career does not only exist inside a voice. Songwriting, artistry, and personal value still remain. That perspective can be grounding when fear tries to take over. Eventually, stepping back from constant touring became necessary. That kind of step can feel like fading away in an industry that moves quickly, but Vince made sure recognition stayed alive. Public praise, interviews, and award show mentions kept Patty's contributions visible. Respect did not disappear just because appearances became less frequent. Descriptions of Vince's character often came with a certain consistency. Patty spoke about someone who lifts others rather than competing in a harsh way. Instead of rivalry, a sense of shared journey. Success for one artist did not need to mean loss for another. That mindset can feel rare in an industry built on charts and rankings. Would more artists thrive with that kind of support system? Admiration also moved back toward Vince over the years. Patty openly praised musicianship, songwriting, and character. Awards and recognition kept coming Vince's way, including honors like Grammys and Country Music Awards, and Patty never held back in expressing respect. A clear message came through in those comments. Success does not require stepping over others. Talent and integrity can exist together. A career can reach the top without losing kindness along the way. Isn't that the kind of example that actually lasts? Shared values and musical philosophy. As Patty Loveless opens up about a long connection with Vince Gill, a deeper layer begins to show, far beyond studio sessions or shared stages. A quiet understanding seems to sit at the center, built on years of shared belief in what country music should represent. Patty describes a strong sense of responsibility, almost like holding something fragile that has been passed down through generations. A question comes to mind. What keeps that kind of respect alive in an industry that often chases trends? Patty explains that both careers have been shaped by a belief that country music carries history within every lyric and melody. Names like the Carter family, Hank Williams, and Patsy Cline are not just references, but foundations. A sense of duty comes through clearly, a need to protect that legacy while still allowing room for individuality. How does anyone balance honoring tradition while still sounding fresh and personal? Patty suggests that Vince understands that balance without needing long explanations. Conversations between both artists often stretch for hours, filled with deep dives into music history and sound. Patty mentions that Vince carries a kind of knowledge that feels endless, recalling obscure recordings, forgotten musicians, and shifts in sound across decades. Talking with Vince, according to Patty, feels less like casual conversation and more like sitting in a classroom led by someone who has lived inside the music. Who even keeps that level of detail in mind after so many years? That kind of passion seems rare. A shared background rooted in Kentucky and Appalachian culture adds another layer to the connection. Bluegrass influences, mountain sounds, and that high, lonesome vocal tone create a common language. No need for over-explaining ideas in the studio. A simple reference to the Stanley Brothers or the Louvin Brothers immediately sets direction and mood. That kind of shorthand only comes from shared roots and similar listening experiences growing up. Isn't that the kind of connection most artists spend years trying to build? Beyond music, Patti points to something even more important: values. Respect for people across all levels of the industry stands out as a defining trait. Early observations of Vince's behavior left a lasting impression. No difference in treatment between a major star and a crew member. Names remembered. Conversations held with genuine interest. Simple acts of kindness repeated over time. That kind of consistency says a lot. How often does genuine humility survive long careers in entertainment? Patti shares that this approach has shaped personal conduct over the years. Watching someone lead by example often carries more weight than advice. A quiet lesson in character, learned through everyday interactions rather than big speeches. That influence has helped build a reputation not just for talent, but for integrity. When peers speak about both names, praise often extends beyond music into personal character. Isn't that the kind of legacy that lasts longer than chart positions? Faith also plays a steady role in strengthening the bond. Shared beliefs create space for conversations that go deeper than music. Gospel recordings, moments of prayer, and times of reflection bring another dimension to the connection. Patti mentions that discussions around faith feel natural, without pressure or discomfort. That kind of openness can be hard to find. How many friendships in the industry reach that level of trust? Moments of difficulty seem to reveal the strength of that connection even more. Support during hard times, encouragement through uncertainty, and shared reliance on faith all contribute to a bond that goes beyond professional ties. Patti describes a sense of grounding that comes from having someone who understands both the music and the personal journey behind it. Looking at everything together, a quiet pattern begins to reveal itself, almost like pieces of a story finally falling into place. Shared roots, shared values, a deep belief in music, and an unshakable faith all come together to form something that feels rare and enduring. This isn't just collaboration or surface-level friendship, it's something carefully built over time. And really, how often does something like that truly last? Stay with me, because what this legacy means might surprise you. The legacy and what it all means. At 69, Patti Loveless speaks with a calm kind of clarity about a long road in country music, and one name keeps coming up again and again: Vince Gill. Patti Loveless explains that Vince Gill has never been just another artist in the same circle. Never just a voice on a duet track, never just a familiar face backstage. Patti Loveless says Vince Gill became a steady presence from early years, almost like a compass that kept pointing back to the reason country music mattered in the first place. How many careers in that industry come with a steady presence like that, especially across decades filled with pressure, trends, and constant change? Patti Loveless describes a connection built on something deeper than business. Patti Loveless mentions that many partnerships in music start with strategy, chart positions, or label decisions, but this one grew out of shared respect for songs, for storytelling, for melody. Patti Loveless notes that both names always leaned toward songs that carried meaning, songs that felt lived in. And that raises a question that feels almost uncomfortable in today's industry. Does genuine artistry still come first? Or has commercial success taken over too much space? According to Patti Loveless, a quiet lesson came out of that connection. Patti Loveless says success does not always need noise, drama, or rivalry. Patti Loveless points out that friendship can sit right at the center of a long career without turning into competition. In an environment where headlines often chase tension, Patti Loveless recalls a different path, one where two artists simply remained friends for years without turning connection into spectacle. How often does that happen in a business that thrives on attention? Patti Loveless reflects on how unusual such a bond looks from the outside. Patti Loveless says people often expect complicated narratives when a man and a woman share a long creative history. Patti Loveless explains that no hidden angle ever existed, no secret storyline waiting to be exposed. Patti Loveless calls the bond simple and real, built on trust and mutual respect. That kind of simplicity almost feels rare now, does it not? Influence becomes another part of this reflection. Patty Loveless shares that younger artists often point toward both names as examples, not just because of music, but because of conduct. Patty Loveless highlights a quiet kind of leadership that does not rely on loud statements. Patty Loveless says a new generation has picked up on certain values, choosing meaningful songs, respecting traditional sounds, and carrying forward a sense of responsibility toward country music roots. And that leads to another thought. Can influence become more powerful when delivered through actions rather than speeches? Patty Loveless expresses a kind of satisfaction when hearing echoes of that approach in newer voices. Patty Loveless mentions hearing storytelling come back into focus, hearing instruments and arrangements that feel closer to older traditions. Patty Loveless describes that moment as reassuring, almost like a signal that country music has not completely drifted away from core identity. In a time when genres blur and sounds shift quickly, does that sense of continuity offer comfort? When conversation turns directly to Vince Gill, Patty Loveless becomes more reflective. Patty Loveless emphasizes authenticity as a defining trait. Patty Loveless says the same personality shows up everywhere, on stage, in the studio, in private conversations. No switch, no performance, beyond music itself. Patty Loveless explains that kind of consistency feels rare, especially in a world where image often gets carefully managed. And honestly, how many public figures maintain that same tone across every setting? Patty Loveless continues by pointing out that Vince Gill never chased attention for its own sake. Patty Loveless says focus always stayed on making meaningful music and being a decent human being. Success followed, but success never seemed like the main target. Patty Loveless describes that balance as something worth studying. Can a career reach that level of recognition without losing grounding? Patty Loveless seems convinced that such a path exists because Vince Gill represents proof. Awards naturally come into conversation, but Patty Loveless treats awards almost like background details. Patty Loveless acknowledges recognition from major institutions, mentions Grammys, mentions industry honors, but quickly shifts focus back to music and friendship. Patty Loveless explains that real highlights never came from trophies or charts. Instead, Patty Loveless remembers moments on stage, moments when harmonies locked in perfectly, moments when a glance between two artists confirmed something special had just happened. That kind of memory carries more weight than any award, does it not? Patty Loveless also recalls conversations away from the spotlight, late nights filled with discussions about songs, about life, about choices. Patty Loveless shares memories of laughter during difficult periods and moments of challenge that pushed growth. According to Patty Loveless, Vince Gill offered encouragement when things felt heavy and honesty when improvement was needed. That kind of support sounds simple, but how often does such support remain steady across many years? As health considerations led Patty Loveless to step back from regular performing, the connection did not fade. Patty Loveless says communication continued. Music recommendations still passed back and forth. Support still present in quiet ways. Patty Loveless describes the bond as something tested by time and strengthened by shared experiences. Not every professional relationship survives distance or change, so what makes certain connections last? Patty Loveless openly admits uncertainty about how a career might have unfolded without Vince Gill. Patty Loveless suggests fewer memorable moments, fewer lessons, fewer songs that now hold special meaning. Patty Loveless calls Vince Gill a gift, not just as a collaborator, but as a reminder of staying true to personal values. That statement carries weight because it touches on something deeper than music, the idea of identity in a demanding industry. How many people hold on to identity after decades in such an environment? Looking at the current landscape of country music, Patty Loveless speaks with a balanced perspective. Patty Loveless acknowledges growth, acknowledges new styles, acknowledges different directions. At the same time, Patty Loveless expresses hope that traditional storytelling and heartfelt expression will always have space. Country music, according to Patty Loveless, can hold many approaches without losing core essence. That idea sounds simple, but maintaining balance between tradition and change often proves difficult. Patty Loveless describes the partnership with Vince Gill as something that stands apart in a modern industry filled with calculated collaborations. Patty Loveless highlights mutual respect, shared values, and genuine friendship as the foundation. No forced narratives, no strategic alliances designed only for charts. That authenticity creates a kind of quiet strength. In a world that often rewards spectacle, does quiet strength get overlooked too easily? When thinking about a message for Vince Gill, Patty Loveless becomes more emotional in tone. Patty Loveless speaks about gratitude, about appreciation for music created together, about appreciation for friendship that lasted through different phases of life. Patty Loveless connects personal growth with that relationship, suggesting that influence extended beyond professional success. Gratitude like that does not appear overnight. So what builds such depth over time? Patty Loveless makes it clear that speaking about Vince Gill does not come from any need to reveal secrets or revisit conflict. Patty Loveless frames this reflection as a form of honoring something meaningful. A long career brings many encounters, many partnerships, but only a few relationships leave a lasting imprint. Patty Loveless positions this one as central, something worth acknowledging publicly. Toward the end of reflection, Patty Loveless describes certain friendships as almost destined, though phrasing stays grounded rather than dramatic. Patty Loveless suggests that music brought two paths together for a reason, allowing collaboration, support, and shared experiences to unfold naturally. That idea may sound simple, yet such alignment rarely happens in a consistent way across decades. Patty Loveless leaves a final impression centered on gratitude, respect, and appreciation for a person who represents strong values within country music. Patty Loveless connects personal life improvement with that presence, suggesting that influence extended far beyond songs and performances. That kind of statement invites reflection. Does success feel more meaningful when tied to genuine relationships? In the end, reflection circles back to a broader idea about connection in an industry often described as surface level. Patty Loveless presents an example that challenges that assumption, showing that depth can exist even in highly visible spaces. Music becomes one part of that picture, while friendship becomes another equally important part. And looking at everything shared, one question quietly lingers. If more partnerships followed that kind of path, would the industry feel different today? With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.